So can you please tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, and where you're from?
Okay, my name is Margarita Tarragona. I am from Mexico City and I live in Mexico City.
And that's also where you work?
Yes, that's where I work.
And what's your background for doing?
I have a PhD in psychology. I studied for clinical psychology in Mexico as an undergrad. The Mexican system is different from the American system in that it's a professionalizing education. So at the university you already get your degree as a psychologist or engineer or whatever. So I studied clinical psychology and then I did my PhD at the University of Chicago, where I was very lucky to be a student of Mike Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I also that was a program that was more research oriented. It was the Committee on Human Development, and my field of concentration was psychotherapy research. So I was excited to hear about that. And parallel to that, I got my training in family therapy at the Family Institute of Northwestern University and then at the Ackerman Institute for the Family.
Right.
What else should I tell you? But is that enough of my background? Or?
Oh, so what was your way into positive psychology?
Because fortunately I was Mike's students, and even a long time ago as an undergrad, I had this sense that what I was learning was not what I wanted originally. This sense of, that such darkness. Every class I took, I didn't realize how pathological everybody was. Even in the classroom, it was really uncomfortable because, if you sat up front, you were narcissistic. If you sat in the back, you were passive aggressive. If you participate, it was like there was no way to be, like a normal human being.
No.
It was a very pathologizing culture. I took a class on family therapy, and I came out thinking that my family was really problematic. Before the class, I thought I had a really good family. I remember at the time in the 5th semester of the university, you had to go into therapy yourself. And I remember telling my professors, well, I don't think I need therapy right now. I think I'm happy. I was 19, everything was fine in my life. I really was happy. And they told me, what better proof that you need therapy than the fact that you say you do not need it? It makes me laugh, but it was serious. So I'm trying to convey what it was like. So I always had the sense, this is not what I wanted. So it was really fabulous, out of sheer luck, that I ended up at the University of Chicago, and where people were studying things like lifelong development, optimal experience, psychotherapy research. So I really feel totally blessed and fortunate that. And I remember that long ago, 25 years ago, Mike was my professor in several classes, and I told him, we have to use this flow stuff for therapy. And he told me, Margarita, we have to be very careful. We need a lot of research before this can be applied. And I really wanted to apply. And now I feel kind of amazed at how fast 25 years gone by, and a lot of research has been done, and now people are applying it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's the way. And actually, well, tell me if I'm too wordy.
No.
But also in my choice of the kind of therapy that I want to do, I was very attracted to family therapy, not because I would see families together, but because the models or the ideas that family therapy is based on are more optimistic about change. Systemic ideas tend to be less pathological.
Yeah.
And in my therapy career, I've chosen to work in collaborative, narrative, and solution-focused ways, which I think are very fitting with positive psychology, even though they come from very different epistemologies.
Yeah.
So that's part of my background.
And coaching, how did you get into doing some coaching?
I got into coaching because I was curious about it, and because it also seemed to make a lot of sense in terms of positive psychology and in terms of non-pathologizing therapies. How can we help people not just be less miserable, but really, flourish, be what they want to be their best selves, live more fully. So I started, I'll tell you in a second. I think I am not a very mainstream thinker, and because I don't see coaching and therapy as two totally separate endeavors. I think there's a lot of overlap, particularly with certain kinds of therapies. So I think I started doing coaching maybe 6 years ago or so, and then formally getting my training about 4 years ago, I believe.
Yeah.
So
And what kind of training was that for?
I through mentor coach.
Right. With bending and.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And
also, I'm sorry.
No.
Also being a coachee myself.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it.
And your job today, what's the?
I do more teaching than actual practice. I teach in a master's program in counseling at the Universidad Iberoamericana, also in the doctoral program in psychological research at the Universidad Iberoamericana. I created and run a positive psychology diploma program, which is a graduate level but non-degree granting. It's like less than a master's, it's shorter, on positive psychology for people who come from different disciplines. It's very inspired in the math model.
Yeah.
We meet once a month for an intensive weekend, and there's engineers, doctors, psychologists, human resources people, very diverse people. So, and I also have together with two other partners, we have a training center for therapists and educators.
Yeah. And coaching,
And-
what part is coaching of your job?
No, and I didn't mention that other part. And I have a private practice in which I do some therapy and some coaching.
Right. And the people that you coach, who are they normally?
It depends. It's a variety. If more women than men, which I think is very typical for people who look for, maybe not so much in coaching, in therapy. They tend to be a lot of young people recently, people who are either finishing their university studies or in the middle of the university studies and wanting to decide what to do with their lives. Sometimes women, middle-aged women who want to kind of reinvent themselves professionally or in terms of going back into the labor, in the workforce. Different things. Colleagues, somebody who wanted to write a book, somebody who's another person who wanted to develop a therapeutic model, and I would help him as a coach how to work on that. Somebody who wants to a colleague who wants to increase her practice. So I think it's a variety of people.
Right. And the issues that they present when they come to you, what are the most typical issues?
I think a lot of people want to clarify what they want in life.
Right.
Put in different ways, but like they want to either have clearer goals or be able to achieve their goals, or a sense of that they want to do something better or different and they're not clear about what.
Right.
Most people, some do have very clear goals. Like this person said, I want to write a book and I know that I need somebody to walk along me on the process.
Right.
But I think most people have a sense that they could be more than they are, they want their lives to be better, and they want to work on clarifying that and getting there.
Right. And when they come to you, what happens? Like, what do you do?
Right from the beginning?
Yeah.
Well, often we have a phone conversation. Sometimes, since I have a trajectory as a therapist, many of the people call me and they're not sure if they want therapy or coaching. So they bring it up and we talk about what would be the difference and what are they looking for. Some people do call me directly for coaching, but in a lot of cases there's like a process of talking about what would their expectations be, what's their understanding of therapy, what's their understanding of coaching, how are we going to define what we are doing. Sometimes we do it over the phone. The initial contact is always over the phone. I don't know why, but even though coaching is often done on the phone around the world, my Mexican clients often prefer to come in person. Despite the traffic, which is horrible in Mexico City, I don't know why that is. The expectation that it's better if it's face-to-face.
Yeah.
I don't think it is, actually. My own coach is in the United States, and I don't feel the distance is a problem.
Have you met that person?
Yes.
Oh, you have met.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, how much in detail do you want me to go into? What do we do?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. So, what happens after the telephone conversation, before the first session? What happens in the first session? What happens between the first and the second session?
Okay.
So.
I think it varies very much. I don't have like a protocol. Usually, for me, it's very important in the first session to define what is it that they would like to get out of this initial meeting, and also what they would like if they decide to work together. What would they like to get from the whole process?
Yeah.
One solution-focused question I always ask is, let's say you decide to work with me, and this really is, and this works very well, you know, and after a couple of months or however you want to decide, you say, this was really good for me, this got me what I wanted, how would we know?
Yeah.
So to have people establish what the goals for or work together.
Yeah.
And then No. So I really, in my coaching work, I think I stand on the same epistemological foundations as I do in my work as a therapist, in the sense that I see coaching as a collaborative endeavor, as a conversational process. So basically, we start a conversation about, you know, what are their goals, what they want, and it varies from person to person, and the kind of conversation, I cannot predict it from the beginning where the conversation is going to lead us. I do think that I have, from the beginning, I feel I have my radar on for strengths, possibilities, stories of success, dreams and hopes about the future, commitments, values. So that's something that I'm kind of interested in. But I don't have like a form, like, okay, so let's talk about this and that. So I see it as an evolving conversational process.
Right. And does anything happen between the sessions?
Yes, oftentimes I ask people to, depending on what came up, I very frequently give people homework. Oftentimes early in the process, maybe after the first session, but not always, I encourage people to take the VIA survey or another strength survey of their choice. I think mostly the VIA because it's the one I know best and because it's free. So I think there are other very good inventors that I'm curious about, like strengths too, but and most people prefer to take one that's available for free, and it's in Spanish also.
It's also okay.
It's also in Spanish, though a lot of my clients are bilingual. So oftentimes people come with I give them that homework, and it's very exciting then afterwards to go over it. And then the rest of the assignments, I do like to give assignments between sessions. I'm not very tough about them. They're like ideas. I think of them as experiments. So would you like to try this out and see how it works for you? Sometimes people do them, sometimes they don't do them. And I use a variety of assignments, either straight positive psychology interventions or modifications of them. A friend of mine says that we have to tropicalize interventions.
Yeah.
Or just things that I come up with that I've read in other places.
Right.
So, but I do like to do things between sessions. My dissertation actually was on the experiences of clients between sessions about therapy. When did they remember, think about therapy or their therapist? It's only tangentially relevant in the sense that I think it's interesting how these processes keep working beyond the actual time that you're together.
And so how does that influence positive psychology coaching, the way that you do it?
That I think it's like a bonus to have something to do between sessions. Not always, but oftentimes, you know, that sort of keeps the momentum going.
Yeah.
Sometimes, for example, I ask clients if they give me permission to share with them things that I find interesting or that could be relevant for them. So if during the week I see an article about, you know, the importance of perseverance, and the person is talking about being more persevering, maybe I'll send them an article or a link that I thought would be interesting for them, or things like that.
Right. And you mentioned that when they come back with a test, you go over it?
Yes.
How do you do that?
That's actually one of my favorite parts, and I think it's one of the parts where my other training becomes relevant. I think it's this is my my take. I think that the questionnaire itself is very exciting, that it's fascinating for people to see the graph and their numbers, but I think that it really can become like potentialized n-fold when you have a careful conversation about it with a person. So I think, first of all, I always think the client is the expert. So my first questions are about what do they think about their results? Do they feel that they fit with how they see themselves? Are there any surprises? Did something make them think or be curious? If they would have predicted it differently, how would they have ranked their strengths? So I want to give a person a sense that this is at their service, but it's not like the last word.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like to do a narrative-inspired interview about their strengths. For example, let's say pick one of your top strengths, and is it okay if we explore it in some length? So let's say one of their top strengths is, I don't know, a sense of justice. So what I ask them things like, tell me about the story of justice in your life. When did you first realize that justice was something important to you? Can you think of a special moment or event in your life, or do you feel it's all? Tell me about it. And oftentimes people can, I remember when I was 8 and my grandma gave me a little ducky for my birthday and my sister got one too, and I felt it was not fair because it was my birthday. So it's to ask people about, and then I ask questions about what effect has this strength had on your life? How do you, well, it's a given that it's positive, but I check, is this something, has it had positive effects in your life? In what areas? Do you see this strength having an impact in your work life, in your couple's relationship, in your family life? I ask people, something very important that I'm glad to see in positive psychology now, is that it's becoming more relational. In my training in family therapy and there's a lot of emphasis on how our identities are relationally created and maintained. So I try to introduce that too. So I don't think of strength as something you have inside of you, like a container with a substance in it, but as something you perform that you're able, that's something that emerges in relationship with others.
Yeah.
So I like to ask them, in which of your relationships do you see your sense of justice coming through or being more evident? How does that happen? Who are the people that help you be more just or more fair? How do they do that in your life? What does it mean to you that they do that?
Yeah.
So we have what if you keep how important is this strength for you right now? If you continue to, if this continues to be a strength in your life, what do you think will be the next steps that you take? And then how does this strength, do you think this strength can help you achieve the goal that you want to achieve in our process together?
Yeah.
So those kinds of conversations, which I find are very, very enriching. Lots of stories about that strength in their life.
Yeah. Do you use other tests also, other assessments?
Yes, sometimes I use the one I use the most is the VIA. I often ask clients to do Barbara Fredrickson's positivity ratio for a week. Interestingly, a lot of clients, once they go into the Authentic Happiness site, get curious about the other tests and take some of the other tests themselves because they're curious about them. So in terms of assessment, I use those. Then I use exercises that wouldn't be called assessment, that come from other disciplines. For example, I really like the work of a woman called Kate Wendelton, who does helps people find new jobs.
Right.
And she's written books on how to get the job you want, writing a good resume, things like that. And many years ago I read about an exercise, and I did it myself actually to write my resume, called the 7 Stories exercise. Have you heard about it?
No.
It asks people to write a list of 21 experiences in their life that gave them a lot of satisfaction, regardless of whether other people realized it or not, that were satisfactory for them. And they have to write a list. And they can go back as far as they want in childhood and until today. And then from that list they have to pick 7 and describe those more in detail and see what skills and talents were evidenced in those. So I think that fits perfectly with positive psychology and solution work. And I often use that, and I find it very, very fun and productive for people. What other tests? In general, I don't use a lot of assessments, other than I'm thinking mostly I use the VIA and Bar Fredrickson's Positivity. I do talk, it depends, many times we end up talking about flow, but I don't do an assessment of flow. It's more like talking about it.
Yeah. And when you use tests, are there specific reasons for using the tests, or do you use them for all clients, or?
I use it for a lot, but not all of them, because I see them as a really good springboard for a conversation. It's not that I have like a scheme in my head that if a person has this strengths, I will work this way. If a person has this, I'll work that way. It's more because I think it kind of sets the stage for a positive psychology infused interaction. It kind of transmits the message that we're really going to focus on your strengths, on what works well, on the best of you.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool for people to get the numbers and the graphs.
Yeah.
And then I think it's very exciting to use it as an entryway into their world and their conversations.
Right. And I'm thinking the graphs, then they have to pay for or do you pay for the report?
No, I'm sorry, they don't get the graphs, they just get the rankings. I'm sorry.
Right.
Because the report, I'm confused, the one with the report. I haven't done that, and I've wondered if I should. I think I would, and I've debated whether I should pay for it or they should, and I think that I should pay for it because I'm pretty expensive for Mexican standards, so I think I'll do that.
Okay. What about positive interventions? Do you use positive interventions?
Yes, I do quite frequently. Also in the same vein, I feel, the way I see it, I feel that everything, or the little that I've learned, what I've read, what I've studied, I like to think of it as like these treasure chests that I have open beside me. And I reach out to them depending on what the person is telling me and what's important for them right then. So if somebody is telling me about something that has to do with feeling very grateful, or not, or feeling very unappreciative in their life, then I think, well, what about doing a 3 blessings exercise or a gratitude diary? Or if somebody is saying that they haven't exercised since they were 30 and they're 45, maybe, but that would be slightly different. Maybe I would talk about the importance of exercise, but maybe I could assign them an exercise about that. So the ones I use the most are, I guess like every other coach probably, the gratitude diary, sometimes the gratitude visit, the positivity. I see the positivity ratio both as an assessment, but more as an intervention. I think as you do it, it makes you more aware of your emotions, and something happens to them. What else? I do a lot of things. What other? Writing the bucket list exercise to write your goals. And the most, of course, using your strength 1 week in a different way.
Yeah.
Which other ones? Writing journals, which is not strictly, it's based on Pennebaker's work. It's not an intervention itself. I often do the best. Did I tell you the best? Writing about your best self. What else? Sometimes, this is not a positive psychology intervention, but sometimes I interview people in the future as if they've already reached the goal they want to reach, and how. So you wrote your book, how wonderful. When was it published? Well, in 2012. And how did you do that? And but that's not I guess it's not a proven positive psychology intervention. So yes, I think I often use them. I also really like to do something which I called accompanied self-help, which is to recommend good positive psychology books like The How of Happiness, like Happier, like Positivity. I think that one unique feature of positive psychology is that it's produced really good, maybe for the first time in history, almost scientifically based self-help.
Yeah.
So sometimes I recommend a book to the client, and then we kind of share how he or she is doing with the book, or what they found helpful or interesting.
So you say share. So if you recommend a book, do you discuss it afterwards, or what happens?
Yeah. Well, I think, let me backtrack a little. I think that positive psychology can influence work in different ways. I've written a little about this, so that's what I'm trying to remember, at least reflecting upon my work. I think the first one and most important is the one that looks perhaps the simplest, which is to be aware and sensitive and curious about what goes well in people's life, what makes people tick, what makes people happy, what makes people feel their life is meaningful, what makes people be their best. So I think that's the most important one, like an attitude, a stance, a way of relating to somebody. So I think that's the first level. The second level, I think, second way is sharing, bringing information into the conversation. So, for example, if somebody's going through a midlife crisis, and I remember a study about women and regret in their 40s, I say, this reminds me of a study about regret in women and how, are you interested in that? Maybe I'll share the article or just tell her. One of the findings was that people who dwell on regrets tend to be unhappy. Or so whatever. So I think if the conversation prompts in me to remember something, then I bring it into the conversation. If the client's interested, we continue. Sometimes people are just polite, say, that's nice, and go back to the thing. So I see it as bringing all that richness of information, to bring it into the conversation for the client to use as he or she pleases, or for us to think together of a way to use it.
Right, yeah.
A third way, I think, is the more structured positive interventions that have already been proven, evidence-based and stuff. So I think there are different ways that some have been proven, but others have not been proven that way, but they are still useful and helpful for that particular situation for that client.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel about it when it's not proven? Is that okay with you?
It is. And here I may be unpopular with other people in the field, but I think it's very important, and from my own training, I think it's very important to know what works in therapy, what works in coaching. But I also think that there's like a local process that evolves between the two people, and that clients can come up with great ideas. You can't just stick to what has been proven by others. Sometimes you can have a great idea, or I can have an idea, and I see it like an experimentation. So I think it can be inspired. For example, let's say that gratitude, we know that for most people gratitude increases their happiness. How would that fit into your life? How can we do that? So in that sense, I think the way I see it, when I say it doesn't matter if it hasn't been proven, is because what I do most is conversation, and I don't think there can be much harm done in talking about your values or talking about your dreams. I think if by intervention we mean actual activities that I wouldn't feel so comfortable, like to say somewhere, run around the block 5 times and then call your grandmother. I don't know if that would be helpful or unhelpful. What I mean is that I don't think that everything that works in therapy is what's been empirically validated. There's also a movement about the difference between evidence-based and empirically validated. And for example, there's a very interesting debate that I agree with in the idea of evidence-based relationships. How it's not so much the actual techniques, but the kind of relationship you establish that really leads to success. And very interesting to know what will be found about coaching in that. How much of what has been found about what's helpful in therapy will be translatable to coaching, or if it's a totally different process to alleviate pain from enhancing well-being.
Yeah.
My hunch is that it isn't. And this is a non sequitur. I also think that almost all of psychotherapy research, all of the indicators of the success of therapy are the decreases in symptomatology or in problems, but hardly any inventories of therapy may have measured if people are actually happier or better. Yeah. So I think that's. But anyway, that's a different story. What was I telling you? Oh, so yes, I do a lot of things that are not proven, but mostly is conversations with people.
Yeah. Well, I really like the other subject also with what's evidence-based and psychotherapy research. That's one of my favorites, actually.
Oh, okay.
When you talk about one of these positive interventions, do you train them in the session, or do you like 3 good things? Does the client write 3 good things down in the session, or do you just tell them about it?
I usually tell them about them and then write it down on a piece of paper for them to take home. Oftentimes in this day and age, clients ask me, "Can you send me an email about that?" And I do, though lately I've been in touch with, I work with Professor Gonzalo Basigalupe. I don't know if you've met him.
No.
He's Chilean, works for the University of Massachusetts, but now is in Spain. And he's very interested in technology and family life and technology and practices in health and mental health. So anyway, he says we should be very careful about what kind of interaction we have on email with our clients. But maybe because Mexico is so lax, I don't think twice when people ask me to email them the exercise. But anyway.
All right.
But no, we never, it's an interesting point, we never actually kind of practice it in the session.
Right. And what are your thoughts about that?
I had never thought about it. It depends, like if you think of things like relaxation as a positive psychology intervention, I don't think so, because I think it predates positive psychology. Yeah. Those kinds of things sometimes we do in the session, briefly. But I just didn't think, I think they're pretty simple. I didn't think that they required actual practice in the session.
Right.
But now you've made me think.
No, I don't have the answer. And you've mentioned that you draw on knowledge, because that was one of the questions that Robert had, that some coaches learn that they should ask, not tell. Mm-hmm. But sharing knowledge, that's kind of telling.
Yeah.
And so he was curious, do other coaches share their knowledge of the research, the models, the theories, and you've already mentioned some, but can you say some more?
Yeah. I went through that dilemma very intensively in my training as a collaborative therapist, because this does relate to coaching. Because in collaborative therapy, the idea is that the client is the expert, and basically therapists ask questions. And also there's a lot of sensitivity about not imposing an agenda, about not imposing your values, about not imposing. And when I was kind of making the transition to working more collaboratively, I think I was a terrible therapist for a few years, because I felt I couldn't say anything myself. I was kind of paralyzed. And then it dawned on me after that that's not what collaboration is about. That in collaboration, both people can bring things to the table. And there, my mentor and friend Harleen Anderson, who's the creator, one of the originators of collaborative work, told me you can talk about anything. What's important is how you talk about it. So for me, I would never want to tell a person, this is what you need to be happy, or women in their 40s should do this or that. But I feel if I bring it in as Harleen Anderson likes to say, as food for thought and dialogue, it's like we put this on the table and we see if it's interesting to you, if it's relevant. If not, we just leave it aside. So I feel much freer. And I feel in a way that during that period, I was kind of not taking advantage of some of my strengths, in the sense that, I love research, I love learning, I'm an avid reader, I'm a good teacher, my students say. So I felt like I couldn't bring that. And now I feel that's part of who I am. If I can put it at your service, great. If it doesn't feel right, it's okay. Yeah. So, and I feel so much better.
Yeah. Sounds very flexible.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And you feel good about that?
Yes. Because I do really think that that each process, and I think this is what's fascinating, that each either consulting or coaching or therapeutic process is unique and unpredictable. You may know where the person wants to get, where they want to get to, but the way to get there is always a fascinating journey.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And I think that really requires flexibility. I think if you have only one way to do it, it's very limiting.
Yeah, yeah. And when you share your knowledge, are there any certain circumstances where you do it? Like you mentioned before, if it makes you think of something, you can. Are there other instances where you share your knowledge?
Either when people ask me directly, like just recently, a young woman in her 20s told me, I want to be happier. I don't know why I just finished school. I have a boyfriend. My parents are great. I should be happier. Why am I not happy? Can you tell me? So I said, well, I can't. So I said, well, I can't tell you exactly, but if you want, I can tell you what people are studying and what people have found out about what makes people happy. So I told her about, like the pillars of happiness, the 4 pillars. This was before I read PERMA. And we started to talk about those aspects of her life. And so sometimes people ask directly, but I think most of the times it's like a mutual puzzling together, a mutual inquiry. I'm trying to think of when else. Yeah, often because it's something relevant to what they're going through. Sometimes people bring their own. This is interesting. Like recently, somebody brought me the book The Element by, what's the name of this guy? I just forgot. Sir, I think it starts with a K. He's very well known, a British person who studies education. Well, the book is called The Element, and it talks about the importance of finding your element, the activities and the environment where you feel best. So she brought it to me, and it was fascinating. And so it's usually more that I bring
right.
books, information, articles, but sometimes clients do too, and I think that's really good.
And so sometimes when I coach people, it sometimes turns into more like a discussion more than me asking questions all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what does your coaching look like?
Mm-hmm. I think it looks that's a beautiful question. I would say I would love to ask my clients, but I think it looks like either a journalist or an interested researcher, maybe, about that I want to know more about them, or together to discover, or together we're trying to I wouldn't say putting a puzzle together, but figuring things out, or together we're excited about what he or she wants to accomplish. So I just think it feels like well, what do you mean by discussion? Like
so it's
dialogue?
It's because when I learned how to coach, I was told to ask questions
Yes,
and primarily stick to that, and not tell.
Yeah.
But I find myself more often, referring to some research I've heard about it. What do you think about it? And then so we're more. It's not 2 different roles.
Oh, absolutely.
It's 2 more equal roles
absolutely.
that, like, I ask, they ask, we discuss, I say, they say.
Yes.
So
then in that sense, absolutely. Here's where my culture and language got in the way. In Spanish, discussion of sometimes means argument.
Okay.
But that's not what you mean. You mean
No.
absolutely. That's exactly what I like about collaborative work. The idea of a less hierarchical relationship, which I guess characterizes coaching from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that's really energizing.
Yeah, it is.
I would say a conversation, just like you said, a discussion, a conversation, or a dialogue, or.
Right.
But often an exciting one.
Yeah.
Yes, you've made me think about that. That there's something about helping people try to be who they want to be or to achieve that is very energizing. I feel excited for them and about the process.
Can they sense that in the conversation?
I don't know. I would imagine. Well, sometimes I tell them.
Right.
Oh, this is exciting. I think so, because I think you can sense. But I had never thought about it.
So it's not deliberate, like.
No, I think it's more spontaneous.
Right. So it's part of your style, or the one you.
I think it's genuine that it is. That I do find it very exciting. I also find it very humbling and. I don't know what these I don't want you to think I'm corny, but I think that there's something almost sacred in being in such a, when people really allow you into their lives and into their dreams and hopes, it's really, I feel a very, almost like a spiritual connection.
Yeah. I think I know. It's intimate or
very intimate and very. Yeah, I feel like very privileged and and also that have a big responsibility if people are like trusting themselves to me for part of their life. It's very delicate and also humbling, I think.
Yeah. When you adapt things to fit the client, what do you do? Like, do you have any principles you follow or any ideas about it, or?
No, it's again, I hate to sound repetitive, but I think it depends. For example, somebody who didn't like to write, she asked me, I really hate writing. I don't think I can do the writing exercise. And I remembered Pennebaker's studies that showed that talking into a recorder was equally effective as writing in terms of people dealing with trauma. So I just thought, well, what, do you have a recorder? Yes, I have my cell phone. Then why don't you just record them every night? That hasn't been tested. I don't know if it would be considered a positive psychology intervention. I didn't just invent it. I did remember some research that has shown that talking into a recorder is equally effective for something else. So we did it, and she thought it was helpful.
Right.
So I think it depends on the situation. Let me think what else. I'm trying to think of other. Working with strengths sometimes with people who don't have access to a computer, which is rarer today, but it can happen. We can just do. I think the VIA is great, and I love to use it. But I wouldn't say if I don't have the VIA, then we can't talk about strengths. You can tell people, well, character strengths are defined as these, things that are almost universal. They're appreciated for what in and of themselves, and we can develop them. And some examples are love of learning, curiosity. So which would you say are some, or I could show them the list of strengths. Which would you say if you had to guess or bet, which would be your strengths? Which would you say? Yeah. So it's not that I'm recommending that instead of the VIA, but I'm saying if you don't have it with you, or you can't say, well, sorry, now I cannot work on strengths because I don't have the questionnaire. So I'm trying to think of how other ways that I adapt things. Somebody changed the gratitude visit, and this was her idea. They were going to have a family reunion, and she had been talking about how grateful she was to a family member, and she decided to do like a round of gratitude at the family reunion. And she did it and then told me afterwards. So that in that case it was the client, and it was beautiful, she said. Everybody was crying around the table about it because she expressed her gratitude to many of her family members. So I don't know, I'm kind of but in short, no, I don't have like a protocol of how to adapt this. It's very, as one of my clients likes to say, very organic.
Yeah. Is that the way you prefer to work?
Yes, I do. I think this is something I think about a lot, and I don't know if I'm kind of unusual in that. I think that coaching and therapy are not scientific endeavors. I think they are informed by science. I think it's very important for us to know what works, but the process itself is not as scientific in the sense of, okay, now I'm going to manipulate this variable and I'm going to predict what happens. So at least that's the way I think. I think I'm very interested in the scientific research as something that informs my work, but the work itself I think is more, I don't know how to call it, relational, interactional, linguistic. I'm not sure how to put the words I would put to it.
And when you say the research informs, what with the word inform, can you say some more?
Yes, because I do think I would hate this to be interpreted as anything goes, do what you please. I think it is important, for example, there's very little research on coaching so far, but For example, we know that it's very important to have clear goals. So I think it's obviously important to establish goals and to assess frequently how are we doing in terms of that goal, either through a scale, or in different ways. I think there's a lot of evidence about the importance of a good therapeutic alliance and a good coaching alliance. So I do what I can to establish a good working relationship. And then all of the content, what do we know about what helps people reach their goals? What do we know about the importance of finding meaning in your life? What do we know about the importance of exercising, of meditating? So I think there's this vast array of knowledge, and I want to be up to date, and I want to be able to offer that to my clients. I don't rely on, witchcraft or other things like that. But so in that sense, I take science very seriously. What I think is kind of erroneous is the idea that the process itself can be regulated, what's the word? Like the whole thing on manualizing therapy, for example.
Yeah.
I don't think you can manualize coaching either. There can be certain guidelines, but I think that it's each process is unique.
Yeah.
And a lovely phrase, also from my mentor Harlene Anderson. Recently, I was at a conference with her, and she also does coaching, by the way. She talked about the difference between planning and being prepared, and I love that difference. I think it's really important. Planning is, okay, today in this session we're going to do this and this and this and that.
Yeah.
Being prepared means that you have the resources, the skills, the abilities to face and work with the situation as it presents itself.
Yeah.
And that's when I say that it's informed by science. I see it as being prepared, in the sense that I see it as my duty, and I love to learn about what contributes to well-being, but I do not plan. I feel I'm well prepared, but I don't plan every session.
Right. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. You mentioned before the coaching alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say some more about your thoughts on that, and how you do a good alliance?
There, I must admit, I'm kind of blurring the lines between coaching and therapy, because I'm assuming that the same findings about the therapeutic alliance apply to the coaching alliance. But in my head, I do make that transfer. I'm not sure if it's been empirically proven yet, or if it will be. But in the therapeutic alliance, it's been found, or for some authors, that a good therapeutic alliance has like 3 legs: the goals, the tasks, and the bonds. And I think that applies to coaching too. So I really try to establish clear goals. Tasks means to do activities that make sense for the client, that the client finds helpful. And the bond, establish a relationship, a good relationship with a person.
Yeah. And how do you do that?
How do I do? I think that's where a lot of my training in collaborative approaches is very helpful, and I think almost any good. I think if you, first of all, if you establish a relationship of respect and interest in the other person, of curiosity and goodwill towards the other person, if you establish a relationship that's not too hierarchical, but it's more of a joint endeavor, if you get feedback, that's a very important finding about almost any good process, the importance of getting feedback in every session. How are we doing? Is this what you want to be talking about? Is this being helpful? So often I find that's almost enough. I think maybe just like today, Ed Diener was saying that we're wired for happiness. I think we're also wired for connection, and that clients are incredibly forgiving and noble, in the sense that just with a little bit of interest and attention, most clients, evaluate their helpers well. So I don't think that's too hard. But I do guide myself with that, about, are we clear about the goals? Am I doing my best to establish a good relationship with this person based on respect, on I think I would say respect and curiosity are my 2 most interesting, not jump to conclusions, not not to think that I know too fast. And in terms of the tasks, are we doing things that are fun, interesting, helpful for this person?
Yeah, yeah.
And also you make me think, another principle that guides my work that is the idea of not knowing in collaborative work, that you are, and maybe this fits with what you were saying about asking questions, that I am there to be informed by the client, not to teach. Or so it's important not to be in a space of, to be willing to be uncertain, to explore different ideas, not to jump to conclusions too soon.
Yeah.
And I think that in that process of exploration of whatever we're talking about, there's a lot of generativity of possibilities.
Yeah. Also, what about how do you establish credibility, like in you or in positive psychology or in coaching?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, my age is helping. I was remembering, and I started very young to do therapy when I was 25, and I can't tell you how many times people say, "Oh, you look so young," and now they say, "Well, doctor, somebody with your experience." So that's not a problem. Part of that is that I think also, well, by now fortunately I have a good reputation. I don't do much for that actually. I don't do it deliberately. I guess it just comes with it. Well, I guess I try to have, my office is in a very professional building. I try to dress professionally for the occasion. I try to keep my place, to make it an inviting place. But I don't do anything to establish credibility. I think it's kind of a given.
Right.
That's a very interesting question. For example, with some colleagues, we have an ongoing discussion about whether to hang our diplomas or not.
Yeah.
Some people say that creates a hierarchy, but I like it. Like when I go to a medical doctor, I feel safer if I see that he or she actually went to a good medical school.
Yeah.
So, I'm proud of my University of Chicago diploma and my Ackerman Institute diploma, and I do hang them. So I guess that's one way to establish.
Right.
I guess that's the only one. I think that's one of the parts of my life that I feel most grateful for and most fortunate, that I was able to go to such good places to study. So I feel it's almost like a homage to have the diploma. A daily reminder of how fortunate I was.
Is that typical in Mexico to have diplomas on the wall?
Yes, very.
Okay.
Not in other places?
Here it is, but not in Denmark.
Right.
We don't.
I see.
So when I got my math degree, I didn't buy a frame because in Denmark
you wouldn't do that.
It would be very uncommon.
Oh, so. How interesting. Very interesting.
And do you do something to establish positive expectations from the client to you, or?
That's interesting. I guess that's also kind of a given, that people come and they expect to get something good. You know what? This is such good questions. I don't do it deliberately, like as a strategy. I'm going to create a little bit of hope. I think it's like genuine. I do think that most people will, have the skills, abilities, desire to achieve what they want to achieve. So I think it's kind of implicit. Though it's interesting, research does say that it's good to create a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
So I think I do it, but not deliberately, because I do feel excited about them and, enthusiastic about what we can do together. I do transmit it, but I had never thought about it that way. I guess I do, for example, when I ask them the question of how will we know this worked, I say after a few sessions. I don't tell them after 7 years, It's like after a few sessions, if we've achieved what you want to achieve, how will we know? So there the message is we can do a lot in a few sessions.
Yeah. So it's like implicit in the way that you asked it.
In the way it's phrased. But,
right. What about?
Sorry, sometimes people ask me, do you think I can do this, or do you think this can be solved? And in most cases I do, and I tell them yes. So in that case it would be explicit.
Yeah. What do you do to help the clients stay engaged in working towards their goals?
Not much. I think in most cases they are. That's why I think by the time they come, in psychotherapy research, there's evidence that some people show improvement between the call for the appointment and the first session. And my sense is in coaching too, for people, by the time they come or they call you, they are already rolling, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's also kind of biased because of the kind of people that come to me. I would imagine if it would be, for example, coaching that's offered by a company or mandated by the company, then maybe I would have to do all this effort to get the person engaged.
Yeah.
But I have the luxury of people coming to me already motivated in every case almost.
Right. And so if people don't do their homework, or if you know, how can you help them like progress?
I think there's a difference between not doing homework and not being engaged in the coaching process. If they just don't do their homework, sometimes I ask, sometimes I tell them I didn't do it because my child got sick, okay, do you want to do it again for next time? Should we keep it on the agenda? And sometimes they say yes. So if they haven't done it several times, you think maybe this was not such a good idea for homework. Should we look for a different homework? So that doesn't worry me. If I feel that they're not engaged, if they're yawning or maybe canceling several appointments, then I would say, how do you feel we're doing? Is this being helpful to you? If not, how can we make it more helpful? So I think it's important to monitor how it's going.
Right. Mm-hmm. And do you do that systematically?
I try to. I was thinking just today. A couple of days ago, I was in touch with William Pinsoff from the Family Institute at Northwestern, and they're doing this very exciting stuff in which clients input through computers feedback about how the process is going, and therapists have access to that.
Huh?
And I was thinking that'd be really interesting to do in coaching too, to do a study of that. So anyway, the reason I thought about it is because that's a super systematic way of getting feedback, after every session through a computer. I don't do it that way. There's also forms, like the forms developed by Miller and Duncan.
Yeah.
I don't do it that, though I would like to. I was thinking of using Miller and Duncan's forms because they're very simple and easy. But I do it almost always in the conversation.
Yeah.
How are we going? Is this what you're interested in discussing? How was today's session for you? I try to do that.
What do your clients say to this way of working? Like, what's the feedback that they give you?
That's interesting. I think most of them like it. Most of them appreciate it. I was thinking of one client that didn't like it. She told me that she felt it felt a lot like a class. So she didn't like me bringing in.
Right.
But that's one. I think most clients like it and feel comfortable, and they tell me that it's very helpful and they really like talking with me. So most people, I think, would like it. I don't have, maybe I should have more better quantified statistics. My sense is most people like it and are satisfied with it. They refer me people in turn. My professor David Orlinsky used to say that clients vote with their feet. They don't like it, they leave. But overall, I think most of my clients are pleased with it.
Right. And what do they say? What do they say are the benefits that they get out of it?
They say things like, "Oh, I never thought about that before," or "Oh, I had never thought that I could do this," or "I didn't realize this was a strength," or things like, "I really like talking with you," or when we end, "I'm gonna miss you. I really liked our work together," or "Thank you very, very, very much," or "Bring me gifts at the end of the process," or "Write me once in a while to say hello," or that they remember our work together. So I guess those are the kinds of things. Mostly, expressing their thankfulness, saying that they are happy they did what they did, referring other people. I'm trying to think of what else. Coming back sometimes after a few years because they thought it was helpful and they want help with something else.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds. It's very interesting now that you make me think about it, how a lot of it is kind of implicit. Maybe I should make it more explicit, like actually a rating, like a satisfaction survey or something. But it's more like in more subtle ways.
Yeah. Why would you want to make it explicit?
No, I'm not sure. I was just wondering, if we wanted to do a study or if somebody, asked me, in therapy once I had a client call me and he said, what's the success rate? And I thought, well, I haven't measured mine, but I thought, well, I haven't actually measured mine, but most psychotherapy research says that between 70 and 80% of clients benefit. So he said, okay, that's good enough. But in terms of coaching, nobody has asked me flat out, what's the success rate? But I think it might be interesting to have a more systematic assessment of success.
And you mentioned when the coaching process ends. Well, how do you know when does it end? Do you decide that it ends? Or
No, I think clients do, or we do jointly. Sometimes people know ahead of time that they will pay for 8 sessions, and that's all they can. Or, we decide as we go along. It's often when people start to feel that they're close to their goal. Sometimes life gets complicated, people move, or, but I think mostly when we have a sense that they are getting there or have got there.
Right. And how do you find out that they have gotten there? How do you find out that they progress?
Because I think that's one of the greatest parts about coaching, that the goals are pretty clear. Like she wants to write the book, so it's a very tangible thing. The book is ready, or she's written most of it and she feels she can finish the last chapter, the second revisions by herself. Or if somebody wants to, this is an interesting one because it was coaching, but her goal was to have a better relationship with one of her children that had special needs. So we worked together on what would the better relationship look like. Like I would be more present with her and not always be thinking of the next appointment or what she's not doing right. So there we would see, and we would talk about how she was doing on the parameters that she established would be like the criterion for getting there for her. In my experience also, I think it's a little fussier than it looks like on the book. Sometimes it is very clear, but sometimes people say, well, I think I have a better sense. For example, a woman who wanted, now that her children were grown, wanted to decide what to do, and she had a career in a certain field and was trying to debate whether to try to go back into that career or start something totally new, and she decided to start totally new. And we talked about a lot of possibilities, and she decided to go when she had a sense of more or less what she wanted to do, but she didn't have exactly the sense of, this is what it's going to be called, and this what. So for her it was okay to have a sense that she was not going back to her old career, that she wanted to do this and this and this, and she had 3 possibilities, and that was where she wanted to stop for the time being.
Right.
So I think it's a mutual decision.
Right. And there's one question that I've been wanting to ask also. You mentioned several times coaching and psychotherapy, and some differences, but also some things that overlap. Can you say something more about it?
Yeah. I think this is where I'm going to get in trouble with a lot of people. I think, also influenced by collaborative approaches, that the processes that take place in good coaching and good therapy of certain kinds are very similar, and the skills are very similar. I think that a lot of the effort to make a very clear distinction between therapy and coaching is based on a definition of therapy that I don't agree with. The sense that therapy means working with people who are pathological or who have psychological problems, going to the past to look for the origin of problems, and helping people work through those. I think that describes some therapies, but not all therapies. And since the therapies that I do tend to be more focused on resources, possibilities, solutions, they are not so different from coaching. I also think that what differs maybe is the goal, but the process, what I see mostly as a dialogical, conversational process, I think is very similar. So maybe for somebody who's having a very bad relationship with her spouse, and they come to marital therapy, the objective is not to have not to fight anymore. But they also may want to have not just to stop fighting, but how to start enjoying each other more, or how to have a better sex life or how to, whatever. So you could argue that that's also not just taking away the problematic, but also building on what works.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of is a continuum. I think that it's clearly, somebody's depressed, it's pretty clear that that's called therapy. And if somebody wants to, run a marathon, it's pretty clear that it's coaching. But there's a lot of gray in between.
Yeah.
There are people who come to therapy, but I remember somebody, a young woman who was in therapy for some, you could call psychosomatic problems, and we talked a lot about that and her family relationships and her boyfriend. And then she was applying to graduate school, and she was stuck. She couldn't do her applications week after week after week. And we ended up doing the applications together in a couple of sessions, and it was super interesting. I learned a lot about her through her applications that I had never touched about in therapy, her passions. So what was that? Was that part coaching or therapy? And the other way around, people may want coaching to advance on their job, and then something comes up and they start to tell you about what's going on in their relationship with their mother.
Yeah.
So I don't want to argue that it's the same thing. I know that it's not, but I think it's also too simplistic to say these are two very separate, totally separate worlds. I think there's a lot of overlap, and that makes it very complicated. My sense is that there's a lot of guild interests, like in saying, they do this and we do that and we're totally separate. I think it's kind of, even though I love coaching, I think it's a little risky to assume that positive psychology is just for coaching and not for therapy. So I don't know, I feel, and maybe because I wear the two hats, I don't mix in the sense that we're doing both coaching and therapy with this client. I think it's important to okay, what we're going to do is coaching, what we're going to do is therapy, but I think it's kind of an interesting semantic distinction sometimes. So I do see it kind of as a continuum in terms of, let's say, degree of suffering. People who are in a lot of pain, what we do together is called therapy. People who are not in pain but want to be even happier and better or more productive, we call it coaching. But is what I do radically different? No. But this is my case. I think I've had an interesting discussion with Carol Kaufman about that a few years ago, because she told me it's a totally different set of skills. And I disagree, but I guess it depends what skills we're talking about. If your skills as a therapist are confrontation, interpretation, diagnosis, then yes, it's a very different set of skills. But if your skills as a therapist are focusing on strengths, finding possibilities, looking at solutions, exploring hopes and dreams, being curious, being collaborative, those are not exclusive of coaching or therapy. So I realize this is I think it's an unpopular position. For example, I took a class on coaching and ethics. And I told them that in my business cards, I said Margarita Tarragona, PhD, therapy and coaching. And somebody told me that was a huge mistake, that I cannot say two things, that I should have two sets of cards, as a therapist and as a coach. Seriously. So then for my new cards, I just wrote coaching and consultation and not therapy. And now people ask me, but aren't you a therapist? Like, they're surprised. So then I went back to that ethics class and they told me, no, you can't put both things on your business card. But what's important is that it's clear in your contract with the client to establish what it is that you're doing. So I find that it causes a lot of kind of inner tensions between me. I'm in a minority position because even in the world of therapy, I think that, for example, the distinction between individual, couples, and family therapy is somewhat artificial. I think that the kinds of processes that go on, at least for the kinds of therapy that I do, are very similar, individuals, couples, or therapies. And even, like Harlene Anderson, whom I've mentioned many times today, she thinks that consultation, supervision, and therapy are also not that different in the sense of the process. Yes, in the terms of the goal. Yeah. If you're supervising somebody, his or her goal is how to work better with a certain client or how to solve a dilemma with a client. If you're working with somebody in therapy, their goal may be to solve an issue in their personal life. If you're working with, so the goal may differ, but the way we achieve that goal is through similar process. In this case, conversation, dialogue, mutual exploration. and also in my case the introduction of positive psychology findings and interventions.
Yeah.
So I personally don't have a problem with that, but I see that I don't fit. I was telling Ed Diener and Marty that my sense, and I may be a weirdo, is that we could be moving towards a science and practice of helping people flourish, of helping people achieve their best life, their best self. And I think the boundaries between coaching and therapy will be or could be blurred, and we could, because in both cases we're working with people in a very deliberate, personal fashion to help them achieve whatever they want to achieve. So that's the way I see it, but my sense is that many people might think I'm crazy, and I see a lot of energy put into clearly defining what's therapy, what's coaching, what's consultation. But I find I disagree with the way that they characterize consultation and therapy and coaching in those documents. I guess that's also where my kind of epistemological framework comes in, that I'm very influenced by social constructionist theory, and where these distinctions are not, or it's clear that these distinctions are constructions that are useful but also have their limitations. And I think that not a lot of people share that view, and they think that, okay, so it's clear cut, it's like set in stone, this is what therapists do, this is what coaches do, and they're separate. So I don't know how to deal with that. It is a source of conflict for me, not with my clients at all, nor with myself, but in things like this, like, you know, if I had a division on therapy, doesn't mean I can't do coaching, am I? So I don't know.
I understand, because I have the same point of view. What do you think are the mechanisms that make your work actually function? Like what creates or causes the results for the clients?
I feel we're reaching theoretical saturation here, because I feel I'm repeating myself. But I think it's let me think. How interesting. I think it's having, I would imagine, the sense that they have that I really am devoted to or committed to working with them with what they want to do, that I'm really interested in what they have to say and curious about themselves and appreciative. Oh, I love the word, also from the world of therapy. Bill Madsen in Boston says that he sees himself as an appreciative ally. Right. And I think that applies beautifully to coaching too, as an appreciative ally. I'm on your side, I want to help you do what you want to do, and I do it from an appreciative stance about what's best in you. So I like that part. I think that there's also the sense of, I have a friend who's a coach who says that coaching is about helping people commit to their commitments. I think that the accountability aspect is very important. I have found that in my own work as a coachee with my coach. It's different to say, you know, I'm going to exercise, than saying to my coach, okay, I commit to exercising 4 times a week. And having her say, okay, so how did you do? So I think that accountability factor is very important. I think that, now you've made me switch places, I never thought about it. For me as a coachee, I'm often amazed that my coach sees a lot of possibilities for me that are broader and bigger than what I see for myself. And I don't know if that happens to my coachees as well. You know, that's a sense of amplitude of that you can expand. I also think the process of putting things into words, of conversing with somebody, of talking with somebody, gives coherence to your discourse, to your story, and makes your goals more tangible. Of course, the exercises themselves have an impact. Those are the ones I can think of.
And you mentioned accountability. How do you make people accountable? How do you use that?
By asking, you know, did you do this? How are you doing on that? So
Right.
I think that's just by asking how they're doing.
Right.
Or sometimes, okay, I'm gonna hold you accountable to this, okay? Okay, yes. So.
Right. And how do you stay updated as a professional? How do you develop?
I feel I'm very fortunate because I teach a lot, and I think that's one of the best ways to stay up to date. I think it's impossible. As Edina was saying today, I can't be up to date with all of the developments in positive psychology, but I do try. I read a lot. I'm lucky that I edit the Spanish version of the Positive Psychology News Daily, so that keeps me updated. I read journals. Lately I am doing a lot of writing for the, I don't know what the word would be. Not just for professional journals, but for magazines for the general public. So that also keeps me up to date, because I try to translate research findings into a palatable, easy to understand way for the general public. I come to these workshops that I love. I participate in the Positive Psychology listserv. I also go to other, 2 weeks ago I went to a collaborative practices conference. So I think those are all the ways. To teach helps a lot, because I feel it's like accountability. If I say, well, I'm going to read that book one day, okay. But if I tell my students, we're going to read this book for next week, I have to read it.
Yeah.
And also because I find it so fascinating. I'm really passionate about it, so it's easy to do because I like it so much. I wish I had more time to stay updated. How else? And also practice. I think that's one of the reasons I like to be a practitioner and an academic, because I think those areas enrich each other. I couldn't teach about practice without doing it, and I think I wouldn't be very happy just practicing. I really like the intellectual stimulation of academia. So.
And when you learn something new, how do you start using it? How do you integrate it in what you already do?
It depends. I like to be transparent with my clients as much as possible. So sometimes I tell them, I went to this workshop about this and I thought about you. Is it okay if we try it out? And we do. So sometimes, or I tell them, I read about this and it reminded me of your situation and I wondered if this could be useful to you. Would you like to try it? So I tend to bring it as a proposition.
Right.
How else? I'm thinking. I think that's mostly it.
Yeah. And what would you say makes positive psychology coaching different? Is it different? And if it is different, what makes it different?
I think it is. One of the surprises for me when I started training in coaching, and I expressed this, I felt hugely disappointed by the lackluster quality of the text, of the books. They're so weak. I was amazed that one of the main textbooks doesn't have a single reference. It's as if people made this up, when I think I could almost recognize some of the ideas that can be traced back to Rogers or Harding Anderson, or no references at all. And I was really upset about that, and I told the teacher, and he said, well, it's different because this is not academic, it's for professionals, but that didn't convince me. So I felt a real lack of foundations or of seriousness in terms of intellectual seriousness. Somebody said, I don't know where I read this, that coaching was a practice in search for a theory, and I think that's probably very true. I don't think that the only valuable knowledge in this world comes from science. I do think there are other sources of knowledge, but I think that coaching has been very weak, and I think that positive psychology and coaching are a perfect marriage, because I think it's providing would foundation be the word, or the
legs,
findings that support what some coaches did intuitively anyway, or with knowledge that came from other parts. So I think that it can really make coaching a lot more solid, and it fits with the spirit of coaching. The idea in coaching that when people come to you, they already are whole and able, and so I think that it's a good fit, and that it's probably very different to work with a coach that's informed by positive psychology, that has read the research, that knows about at least what science says about what contributes to people well-being, than to go to a coach that's very, who knows what. My sense in Mexico and in the States as well is that since coaching is not regulated, it's like a double-edged sword. There are advantages to not being regulated, but there's a lot of disadvantages. I know a lot of people who call themselves coaches with very little training.
Yeah.
So I think that it's that a coach that knows about positive psychology, I think, is a much better coach, probably.
Because what would the person do differently?
Well, I think he or she would be informed about what contributes to well-being, and that in itself can be a huge difference. For me, that's the most important part. I think the interventions, the positive interventions, can be a little part, but I don't see it as the most important. I think the most important part is having a foundation, a solid foundation on reliable data about what contributes to people's well-being.
Right. Are there things we have not talked about that are important for me? So when the interview ends, I think I have an understanding of your work, but do I have the full picture?
One interesting thing that I think has to do a little bit with this guilt thing between coaches and therapists, I don't think it's just a guilt thing, but I think that's one important element, is the economic disparity. I'm the same person with the same training. If I do therapy, I charge $80 a session. If I do coaching, I charge $120 a session. Why? I think that's absurd, but that's the way it is. Coaching is more expensive. I think because historically, my understanding, it came from the business world versus the health services or the social worker. So there's this sense of much more business savvy on the part of the coaches. But sometimes I find it even a little disturbing that people without many qualifications charge a lot more than I do with 25 years of experience and really solid education. So I often wonder about that. Why such a marked difference in what coaches and therapists make? And sometimes I think, well, maybe I should call myself a coach and not a psychologist because I'll make more money here. So,
what advice would you give to others? Other people who'd like to start, who are interested in positive psychology coaching, and like to start working that way. What advice would you give them?
Well, I'm not big on advice. I guess it depends, because it would depend on each person. But I think it's a very exciting time to do it, because both fields are growing so much. I would advise them to get training in a place that's credible and solid, and to learn about positive psychology, to really read the research, attend conferences, benefit from this body of knowledge that's so exciting and so beautiful. What else would I tell them? I think it's very important to have even if you work alone most of the time, to have a group of colleagues with whom you can exchange ideas, talk about dilemmas, keep each other up to date, to be part of a community, either a professional association, an informal peers group, some way to keep refining your work, to have other people to bounce ideas off with, to share your dilemmas, your successes, so it doesn't become isolated or. Yeah. So I think it's easier to keep it alive and expanding when you're in touch with other people.
Yeah. What would you like to know about others? Like, if I could ask other people that I'm interviewing, what questions would you like to know about how other people work?
I'm very interested about this dilemma or this distinction between coaching and therapy. How do they solve it or not, or what their position is? And in terms of what they work, I would love to be a fly in each person's office and see what they do. I think it's fascinating and beautiful, the diversity in every human interaction. And I would like to know, to see them in action. I would ask them what do they think are their best features about their work, if they could show me a clip of one of their best sessions.
Yeah.
I think that's what I can think of right now.